everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. This is your extra show for the week. My name is Cammy Bell. I'm your host, as always. And joining me, making her debut on Extra, is the host of our excellent show on Patreon, it's Adriana Spina. Adriana, thank you so much for coming on. You've picked a great week to make your extra debuts. We're going to go over the exit from the Europa League at the hands of Athletic Club last night in Spain. But it's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on, Cammy. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. Whether this is an excellent week to choose to be on Extra, I don't know. We'll get into that. But certainly an interesting one and a lot to talk about in last night's game. So I am delighted to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And yes, you're right. There's a lot to kind of go through. Some mixed emotions, I think, following the game last night, Adriana. I was angry and I was frustrated and I was disappointed. I think all in equal measure. I'll be honest with you, getting into the game, and I know with the build-up, we did have players who were rested against Aberdeen last weekend. We played back-to-back games where we had to play a man down. And the manager had made reference on Monday and Tuesday that he was hoping for some good news regarding some late fitness tests for certain players, and that would prove to be pretty impactful towards the game. I think it's fair to say as we kind of go into it.
Definitely.
But now, a few hours later, how are you feeling? How have you digested the result? And I'm just keen to kind of get your thoughts overall.
Yeah. Oh, I think one of my overwhelming emotions coming out of the game last night, apart from abject disappointment, was confusion. There was so many aspects to that game, and tactically, and some of the decisions made throughout the game across a number of factors that just left me absolutely scratching my head. And it was almost one of these ones where you were coming out at the end going, what just happened there? I don't think any of us thought we were going in as favourites. We were absolute underdogs in that game. But I think that, angry, disappointed, really sad that this is where this has ended. Proud that we got as far as we did, but it really feels unnecessary and almost inexplicable as to how we landed with the outcome from the game last night that we did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like ever putting my guests on the spot. And listen, maybe you could answer that, but how were those two penalties not given?
Honestly, I mean, anyone that has taken the time to listen to my Patreon show will know that I'm a relative newcomer to this game. And even I could see, that they were penalties. In particular, after 15, 16 minutes, something like that, and Dessers pretty much gets his shirt ripped right off his back. How could that not be a penalty? Honestly, I can't fathom it. I was hoping, Cammy, with your refereeing background, that you might be able to shed some light, but I'm guessing probably not. I can't explain it. In my mind, we should have been, okay, penalties are never a shoe-in, right? We can never guarantee that that's going to put us 1-0 up. But at the very least, it should have been a red card, in my opinion. But what more evidence do you need that there was a shirt pull in the box, other than the fact there was hardly any of Dessers' shirt left? Like, I don't understand.
No, nor do I. From a refereeing perspective, what I would always say is, and listen, this is where I'm a proponent of VAR because I think it helps the on-pitch referee. If you've got the VAR ref,
yes.
Then it's another set of eyes. We have been critical on Heart and Hand in the past, where sometimes the on-pitch referee will abdicate those decisions and just, allow the VAR referee to make the call for them. And I don't like that, because I do think the referee ultimately has to take responsibility for the decision and for what happens next. So for me, I've always seen VAR as a useful tool, which can be used, that if you've got it wrong, and listen, it'll be no shock to anyone that there's been plenty of refereeing decisions I've got wrong in the past, and I've never ever come close to being able to have a benefit of a second set of eyes. But the overwhelming evidence, as you've rightly said, is you've got a player with a massive hole in his shirt. That does not happen naturally.
No.
And I think what confuses me and still confuses me. I'm not going to say I understand it now, but what still continues to confuse me as to why a review was not held. Now,
Absolutely. And I think you're right, because a lot of focus goes on the referee and the on field decision, which, first of all, is baffling, right? So I apologise if anyone heard my Alexa going off there. I will take steps in a moment to turn that off. But it in itself is baffling because of that physical evidence that you can see right in front of you. So even if you didn't see the incident itself, which you wonder what he's watching if he hasn't seen it, but if he hasn't seen it, then what are VAR doing? I mean, surely that's a clear and obvious error. And if they have reviewed it, why did that take a matter of no time at all? 10 seconds, however long enough for it to be, the game to be restarted and on things go. It makes absolutely no sense. And I think that the burden of responsibility here in terms of the kind of culpability for that error, which it quite clearly is, lies with VAR, in my opinion.
yeah, I agree. And as I say, I suppose really what disappoints me in the modern era now, where all of the officiating team are mic'd up, they've all got comms with each other, is that between the referee and between the VAR, there isn't a conversation to say, how has this happened? As in, how has he got his shirt ripped? Why am I not going to cross to look at the monitor? I'll be honest with you, I haven't had the opportunity to watch the whole incident back, from beginning to end. I think you're probably being generous with the 10 seconds because to me in the game, it felt like as if it was almost instantaneous, and further proved with another penalty incident, which was due to a handball. Following a decent bit of Rangers play, Rangers are screaming for the penalty to be looked at. Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying that I really dislike the handball rule. I think we've convoluted it far too much in terms of what gives it. But equally, and just to prove that I'm fair, I didn't think it was a handball decision against Dujon Sterling last week. Again, I have watched that back a number of times. How we've been so quick from the VAR team to decide that was a penalty, I've got no idea. But this one, I mean, if the Dessers one had a prolonged look, and I use the old air quotes there, but if that was a prolonged look, this one was done, I mean, instantly. There was zero review.
Yeah.
And I can understand the manager's frustration in the post-match, that he's fuming that we didn't get these decisions. And again, I'm going to be fair because there's nothing to guarantee that we score those penalties. There's nothing to anything else. But if you go 1-0 up, away from home, well, if you go 1-0 up, I don't know if it would have led to the red card, if I'm being honest. It might have been a booking potentially.
I mean, he was the last man, and there wasn't a clear attempt on the ball, so
true, but there's also the double jeopardy ruling in terms of he might get the penalty, but then it descales down to the booking. But irrespective, if you've got 20 minutes on the clock and you are now winning away from home with the pressure that's on Bilbao, because obviously hosts of the final, etc., they've got a huge incentive, more than any other club in the tournament, to be able to try and get to the final because of that. It would be incredibly interesting to see if there would have been a change at that point in terms of their gameplay. They're an exceptionally good club. They're from one of the top 5 leagues in the world and very competitive in that league, it has to be said, outside of the top 2. But all of that taken into account, I feel that that's an opportunity that we've been deprived of. It's been a robbery because had we been able to take the lead, and by the way, this, if the positions had been turned and we were favourites at home and there was a huge amount of expectation playing against a team from a lesser league, I can guarantee you Ibrox would have been raucous at that point, because you're desperate to qualify for a number of reasons. It would have been very interesting to see as to how that would have changed the shape of the game.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there's no doubt that those two decisions were material in how things played out. I think particularly the first, because of the fact that so early in the game, putting us on the front foot. I mean, under Barry's time in charge, that would have been pretty much the first time that would have happened, I think. It seems that we need to go 2-0 down before we can get any kind of get our shoulder behind it. But to go 1-0 up on such a big stage, potentially, yes, obviously, I'm assuming that we would have scored that penalty. But I think that really would have changed the complexion of things. And like you said, would have put Bilbao on the back foot and instantaneously. And yes, they probably would have had to change their game plan, but it does change the complexion of it. Yeah.
It's 100%, and it's ifs and buts. We know that that's just about how it goes. Unlike
Yeah.
fans of other teams, we won't bleat about penalty decisions or refereeing decisions too much. However,
No.
I think if you look over, both legs of the tie, then I think it's fair to say that referees were not kind to us. And we'll touch on a little bit later on in terms of upcoming changes at Ibrox, but at the same point, I think if you look across the course of this season, there isn't a single Rangers fan I know that says that we have not made a good account of ourselves. But I also think it's equally fair to say, when you take into account Champions League qualifiers, the League Cup final, and what happened in both legs against Bilbao, that our refereeing decisions have not went our way.
No, absolutely. And the thing is as well, I'd mentioned before about the burden of responsibility being with the VAR team on these two occasions, I believe. If that had happened in the Scottish game, if that had happened domestically, at the very least, we would have had we'd have had the VAR review to go back on, and somebody would have at least gone, all right, hands up, that was an error. Willie Collum would have gone, right, okay, yeah, we made a mistake, and release the audio or whatever. I can't see UEFA doing something similar. We're not important enough. Do you know what I mean?
Not a chance. They're glad we're out, because they don't want the teams from the small league punching above their weight, and heaven forbid that being able to get to a final and not having a huge TV market behind them. They just know exactly what that's like. And to your point, I think we had mentioned this on our Patreon site last week, actually, when we were doing the post-match of the first leg. I think domestically, the penalty against Sterling is not given either.
No.
I don't believe that's the case, but we are where we are, and we have to accept it. But something else, which I think was a big change, you alluded to at the beginning of the show as well, Adriana, was a baffling tactical decision from Barry Ferguson when only a few short minutes after the first penalty call, Ridvan Yilmaz takes a knock. He's pulled up. I think, if I'm being honest with you, there was a few players playing last night that were certainly fitness concerns. Czerny, I think, being another one. Yilmaz definitely was. He was two of the four players who were given a I'm not going to say a clean bill of health, but a passable bill of health in order to be involved.
To be able to start at least. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A weird situation, because the TV camera pans to the bench. Clinton Nsiala is stripped and ready to go. And then Mohamed Diomande is then asked to be able to fill in for Yilmaz at the wing-back role. And the substitution who comes on is not Nsiala, it's Connor Barron, who then fulfills Diomande's space in the middle of the park. Diomande at this point, I think it's fair to say, was probably one of our more productive players in terms of being able to hold the ball up in the middle of the park. I've had some question marks over Diomande domestically for a while. I think that the similarities to a certain extent about Glenn Kamara, where the physical nature of the Scottish game isn't to his taste, but on a level like this, he absolutely can shine.
And he certainly looked like one of the most industrious players last night.
I agree, and this is where I think Barry Ferguson, and I do cut him some slack. Ferguson is operating now at a level as manager which is light years of where he's been at before within his management career, so I understand this, but this felt to me like a really bizarre decision to move Diomande out of that. And if we felt that the decision was a gift for Athletic Club in terms of not getting that penalty given against them, this just simply exacerbated their good fortune, because this removed, I think, one of our key players out of a strong position where he was producing, and I think it gave him far more freedom in the middle of the park now.
Oh, definitely. And I think that was, when I spoke at the start of the pod about scratching my head about some of the decisions, I think that this was a pivotal moment in the game. Moving Dio out of midfield and then putting him Barron there, to me seemed like, well, obviously immediately you're weakening the midfield, because Dio, like I said before, really industrious during the game. I thought he was playing really, really well and causing some problems for Bilbao in midfield, which is what you need to do, I think, against teams like that. And Barron just doesn't perform in that same way. He can't he doesn't have it. I don't think at this point in time anyway. He hasn't just demonstrated that he's got that in his locker, that he can operate in those tight spaces in the way that Dio can. Putting him into the back line just seemed bizarre. And probably, I mean, I don't know if you would agree, but certainly from where I was standing, I thought it looked like, moving him into that kind of into that left wing back position just unsettled the rest of the team, because they're kind of going, right, okay, well, this is an unusual position that he's going to be playing in. And as well as some of the other tactical changes that were made and a little bit of confusion throughout the rest of the game, I think that was the start of it for me, in terms of just starting to unsettle things and these weird tactical decisions, playing people out of position. I mean, I think the starting with the back five was questionable in the first place, especially having Ridvan over at right back. Controversial, I think, and yeah, I think Barry argues that the five at the back is works in certain circumstances, but you would have thought that if they were not going to, if obviously Ridvan had to come off after his injury, I think you're right, probably come back to playing before he was properly ready, potentially, which is maybe why he ended up injured and coming off. But the opportunity at that point for me felt like rejigging the back four and putting it as a back four and keeping Dio in the midfield.
I agree. I think,
or replace for like, and bring on Nsiala as to what, like, that was what we thought was going to happen in the first place.
Yeah, and I think, to illustrate your point beautifully, if you remember the shots on television last night where you could actually see Tavernier and Suter utterly bewildered by what was happening at the moment.
Absolutely.
And, that's where it's not just about the reshuffle that had to happen, because I think that, and again, I give the manager some slack, that there was definitely square pegs and round holes. He's having to play players out of position because either he doesn't trust certain players to be able to fulfill what they're going to have to be asked to do. Therefore, you're going to have to move someone else, because again, whether you talk about current form or whether or not you talk about what they can do, because again, this was, and it's Rangers up the back across the course of this season that I thought Yilmaz was excellent at Ibrox last Thursday.
Yeah.
But we're having to game manage him. I think that's fair. He's not the only one. There's plenty of them. But you could see how, the management team wanted to do that shuffle, which certainly gave us an impact. But the hope was we could make it to half-time at 0-0. We could regroup. The manager could walk through some of what he was trying to do and get some time with the players. But it wasn't to be, sadly.
No. And it was a shame too, because I think Ridvan was doing well. Despite being out of position, he put in some really nice blocks. There was one incident, I can't remember exactly when it happened, but obviously he was still in the park at the time. But there was one incident in one of the many, many shots that Bilbao took, where the ball was pinballing around that box, and he put his body in front of it a couple of times and managed to get us out of jail. So yeah, he was doing well.
Yeah, he's always going to be a divisive figure, I think, Ridvan Yilmaz. But yeah, it'll be interesting. But as I was about to say there, we get to 4 minutes of added on time. And John Suter, and I'm I can't really explain this in any other way than using that good old phrase of, I think, has a bit of a brain fart, as he tries to get across the man who's running through it. He's in the inside of the box. Balogun is shielding the Bilbao player and doing a good enough job with that. But the one thing you can't do at this level, and we've talked about it time and time again, is you can't have a lapse in concentration. And that's what I have to put this down to for John Suter. Now, it's, I don't want to bash him too much, because I do genuinely believe that John Suter does make a difference to our defence when he's on his game. But this is the pitfall that you can expose yourself to, that if you have to commit to a foul, and I understand exactly what the Bilbao player's trying to do, because he wants to be able to almost be impeded as much as he possibly can to buy the penalty. But Suter gives the referee a decision to make.
He falls for it. This is the thing, he falls for it.
The referee, I think it's fair to say, wasn't going to be too hesitant in being able to give Bilbao a decision, and this was absolutely delivered to them on a plate. Bilbao were able to step up. William Kelly sent the wrong way. We're now down 1-0 at half time, I hate the cliche of, it's a bad time to lose a goal, but this is absolutely a bad
Absolutely.
time to lose because of the way
Yeah.
how the game had panned out by this stage.
Absolutely. And I think if we could have hung on at 0-0 until half time, then I think we could have had the opportunity for, a bit of a regroup. Like you say, maybe give Barry the opportunity to reshuffle the pack, to use the terminology that he used, and get back on and go for it. But that really must have sucked the air out of those guys. I felt bad for Kelly because, he had such a great effort last week. And, I actually found myself thinking probably in the kind of the 5-10 minutes running up to that going, oh, if they end up with a penalty, lightning doesn't strike twice, does it? So, what can we expect Kelly to pull off a kind of a miracle save on two occasions? And yeah, unfortunately I was proven right. Sent the
Yeah,
wrong way, like you say. But that's penalties, isn't it? But it did seem like an unfortunate situation that Suter had got himself in. Tangle of feet, maybe bought, like you say, by the Bilbao player, but yeah, it was a sore one.
Yeah, and as I say, we get in at 1-0 down. Inciala does come on at the beginning of the second half. A surprise for me because I think at this point I was absolutely screaming out for Dessers to come off. I think Egeman was the obvious replacement. There was a couple of reasons for that. Again, I'm certain that at some point in the future in Heart and Hand, we will have a whole podcast series dedicated to Cyril Dessers because it feels like we just talk about him every single week. But
Yeah, I
it
don't
was
know if we'd have a whole series because we'd probably just say the same thing over and
I
over
don't
again, just
I
all
don't
these
know.
different examples of it.
It might be a lazy pod because we would just do a verbatim soundbite and just put it on loop for 25 minutes. But
Or a game of
it,
Desser's bingo. How about that?
it
Game
was the
by game.
same. It was the same from what we've come to expect with Cyril Dessers. I don't want to bash him too much. I'm not going to spend any real time on that. There was no hold up from him. We
No.
needed to be able to try and get something like that. It was, made even worse with the fact that we'd removed Diomande from being able to at least be able to try and get the ball away from our goal and hold it up there for a little bit before it then came back in. Dessers, the ship has sailed in terms of any hope of him being able to ever learn that as part of his game. But I am going to give him some credit in the fact that I understand why he ended up getting a booking because I don't think of everyone who watched that last night and everyone associated with Rangers, he was probably, the one in the most disbelief at the fact that penalty decision had been given for him. But having said that, I was concerned about the booking. I thought he was walking a bit of a tightrope. However, Igeman did come on later on in the game. He came on, just I think we were on 5 minutes into it, but it was a forced replacement for Liam Balogun, who took a sole one as he and John Suter were going for the ball. Egeman, again, very young. He's raw within this. His form hasn't been great, but again, he gets the goal up at Pataudry, so you're hoping to be able to see an uplift. He is definitely a better option with this. So
And he can hold the
hoping,
ball up, like you say. I mean, sorry to talk across you, Cammy. I think you're right. Dessers can't hold the ball up, and but that's something that Egeman can do. And so I think you're right. I felt the same. Bringing Egeman on for Dessers at halftime felt like the sensible thing to do, and also getting Inciala on and getting back into having actual,
a little
having
bit of structure.
a bit of structure in defence,
Yeah.
rather than a kind of, like you say, square pegs and round holes. But yeah, I think Dessers had probably not the most Dessers-like performance, I think, yesterday, in as much as you usually see him peppering the box with all kinds of balls wide of the post, hitting hitting the bar, skying them all over the place, and and having multiple shots on target. He didn't really seem to even be doing that last night, which for me was, the catalyst, I think, for having him changed a wee bit earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously,
And listen,
Barry didn't agree.
we'll never know for sure, but there could have been a game plan to say we were going to swap them round at halftime. We don't know because it's just the way how the game had kind of formulated. Rangers did start to come back into it. I'm going to give the team some big credit for that. They weren't beaten at this stage. However, with 10 minutes to go, we had kept the Williams brothers quiet I think it's fair to say it across in Ibrox, but this was not going to be the case as Nico Williams, his brother, wasn't playing because of an injury knock. But Williams is able to come in at the back post. James Tavernier caught sleeping, and that's by his own admission, said that he was trying to organise what was happening, but Williams comes in at the back post. 10 minutes left, we're 2-0 down the tie. We are done and dusted at this point. There wasn't going to be miracles at this stage. We've obviously discussed the Raskan penalty shout at this point, but this is where, again, you can't turn off, you can't fall asleep. We saw the same thing with Jeff Day down at Old Trafford, and that cost us at least a point. But however, this is something that I think that James Tavernier has been guilty of across his entire time at Rangers. But that was it. The tie was pretty much done. I do give the team credit for being able to try and muster up a bit of a fight. We know that we were underdogs going into the tie. We still had some of that belief because the Europa League has been, a great experience for us over the last number of years. But I think, whether we talk about the penalty decision towards the tail end of the first half, but this one completely killed it. We were done and dusted.
Yeah. And, it's a shame because I think for all the criticism that's levelled at Tav, and yeah, there's no denying it. It was his mistake that cost us that goal. But otherwise, I think over the course of the two games in the tie, actually gave a pretty good account of himself, and certainly dealt with Williams really pretty well. Otherwise, particularly in the first leg. So I think, yeah, it's just a shame. I felt bad for him, but and I felt worse for us. But yeah, I think that was it, pretty much done and dusted at that point. And I think there was still a little part of me going, but it's Thursday night and it's the Europa League, and we always come good in these. Maybe we'll pull off a miracle couple of goals, but no, it wasn't to be. And there was that kind of last gasp chance in the box, I think, where there was I can't remember, forgive me, who it was that managed to, I think it might have been Raskin actually, who rattled it off the post, and thought we might have got one back, but nah, wasn't happening, was it?
No, and Egerman had that chance as well where it was right at the death.
Oh, that's right.
Where
That's right.
It dragged a little bit wide, and again, I understand it, but we had to come out, we had to be able to do all that, and this was the kind of dying embers of the game as well. But sadly not to be, and Rangers exited the Europa League at the quarterfinal stage. Just thinking across the campaign as a whole, Adriana, I'm keen to kind of get your thoughts with, reflecting back on the group stages or performances within that. Fenerbahce, I think was always going to be a huge game for us, and we were able to navigate past them as well. This Rangers team has not given us a lot to shout about across the course of this season. There's obviously been a lot of changes at the club, including the dugout as well.
Yeah.
But that all being said and done, I think for us to be able to get to the quarterfinal and to still be alive when it gets to 3/4 of the way through the tie, the team do deserve credit for that. But this was just simply, I think, a game too far for this squad now. And whilst we by no means can walk away from that saying that we didn't give it a go and that there was certainly some contentious decisions in it that could have fallen in our favour, I probably reflect on it now, probably feeling quite proud of how well we've done within this. Domestically is a whole other kettle of fish.
Aye.
There's no point really focusing on that too much now.
Yeah.
But across the European campaign, even going back to those qualifiers that I mentioned in the Champions League, there's certain things that we can reflect back on and just say we did not get the rub of the green.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I said at the start of the pod. As much as I was confused and disappointed and angry, I think the fact when we got this far, teams from Scotland are not meant to get this far. Like you say, the whole thing is set up to favour, I don't want to use that word, but there you go, for the big leagues, and we're an annoyance potentially. Like you say, it doesn't bring in the big bucks, and so for us to hold our heads up and dig in and get some of the results that we did, particularly against the likes of Fenerbahce, and I think as well, when we put in a good account of ourselves, at Old Trafford as well, there was a number of games where we thought, yeah, we're going in here as underdogs, so it'll be, this is where it ends. And then the Thursday nights, especially the Thursday nights at Ibrox, kept delivering and kept delivering against that backdrop of pretty abject domestic performance. I think it is something for us to be proud of, and that's the kind of the small glint of something positive that we can take from this season. So yeah, I feel the same way. I think that we should be proud of where we got to. We need to dust ourselves off and see what the future holds. And I think with the new owners coming in, yeah, this is the last that we're going to see this particular kind of setup. I think that we've seen these runs in Europe over the last few years. I think with the 49ers coming in, that we're going to see big changes. And I guess I'm wondering if that's also going to mean that our, ability to deliver these kind of very European performances is going to continue into next season, or if we're going to start to focus more on the domestic, and if that will, that will rule out the European performances or cancel out the European performances. I don't know. So it's almost the feeling of the end of an era in more than one sense, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I did want to get your thoughts on that, because the challenge that we're going to have is that, and I know that everyone now is looking towards the tail end of the season. It would, as I think most people I've spoken to could say, it could finish tomorrow. As far as we're concerned, that's it
Yeah.
done. The thing that we're looking forward
Yeah.
to now is say whatever changes happen as a result of the takeover. It's obviously starting to get into as far as I understand it, towards its end game now of the deal being completed.
Mm-hmm.
But I always want to try and remain optimistic, but there's also a realistic side to me as well. It says that it's going to take time for us to be able to have potentially get into another transitional season where there's a lot of the squad that needs trimmed, and I don't think many people would lose sleep over quite a few players going.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to start naming names because I think that's been a wee bit unduly cruel. However,
Yeah.
it's going to take time. And the issue that you've got, as you've mentioned within European campaigns, is that really you don't get any time to rest, because, again, with our status, the qualifying rounds start to come in thick and fast. What I'm interested in is do you see it then with European qualifiers in mind that the priority has to be, as soon as the takeover is done and dusted, that we then start to put the real heavy focus into player recruitment and
Mm-hmm.
bringing new bodies in? And if some leave of their own volition, if some are sold, whatever has to happen at that point, how big a priority is it for us to be able to hit the ground running as soon as that takeover's done and dusted?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. These games are going to come on as quicker than we realise, and like you say, player recruitment doesn't happen overnight. And if we're going to have to do the scale of rebuild that I think a lot of people think that we're going to need, then we might just need to take it on the chin that we're not going to be able to compete. It takes time to build a team. It takes time for the players to gel. These are going to be people that are going to come in that will never have played together, that perhaps don't speak the same language, that are coming in potentially with a completely different style, for example. And to be able to hit the ground running as a team that can compete at the highest European level, I think probably is too much to ask. Um, and as well, I think if you were to talk to, I mean, I don't know if I can't speak for everybody, but I think if you were to talk to fans in general around where the priority is, the priority probably is domestic. It's going to be the league, and being able to put ourselves back in a position where we can challenge for the league. Is that going to influence the decisions around player recruitment, the decisions around what the managerial appointment is going to be? I don't know. So when it comes to European football, I think that could potentially be sacrificed. Not to say that's what I want to see happen, because I love to see us doing well in these campaigns, but it feels like a bit of an ask that we would want to set ourselves up in such a manner that we can perform better domestically, and also be ready and on the front foot to start European qualifiers within. I mean, when would they start? Like July time, maybe?
Yep, pretty
Yeah.
much. And then across that course. And that's,
Mm.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's where there's a lot of things that we have to get set in place. If we're talking about, as you rightly say, a new management team,
Mm-hmm.
again, not speaking in anyone else, but I think that this is showing that, for me, I'm not, necessarily against this idea of we have to be able to get a sporting director in place, then a manager, and then, allow normal sequence of events to continue. I think Niles Coppin has to get this window right, otherwise I think his job's at risk.
Absolutely.
And to your point around, I would say that the vast majority of fans that I've spoken to, the league is always the primary focus. Again, no one likes seeing that lot being able to run on a continued train of success. We have to be able to stop that, and I'm hoping that we can do that within a dual tandem of going and putting ourselves back into a strong run within Europe. But that absolutely, if anything, has been born out of the course of this season. It's shown us that has to be from a strong squad, because you're not going to be able to rely on 13 or 14 players to be able to do it for you twice a week for 8 months. It's just simply not practical.
No.
But we will have to wait and see, and that is, I think what we're really keen to be able to see how the next stages develop at Ibrox as well. So
Yeah, I mean,
it will
we'll wait and see, won't we? It's going to be interesting times, and I think when the off season usually is a period where you're kind of twiddling your thumbs and just waiting to see what kind of moves are going to happen, but otherwise there's not an awful lot going on. I think this is going to be a more interesting one than usual, isn't it?
100%. 100%. Well, listen, that will nearly do us for Extra this week, folks. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to us. I hope that you are feeling better. I hope you're looking forward to your bank holiday weekend. Unfortunately, due to Rangers' unacceptable exit out of the Scottish Cup, there is no game for us to be able to review this weekend. I'm pretty sure David will be having the bank holiday off on Flagship on Monday. However, I will be back with you next week as well. We'll have a little bit of an overview of the post-split fixtures. Before I go, Adriana, I want to be able to absolutely give you your due, because you've mentioned already you're pretty new to football and following Rangers, and what seems like only a few short months ago you came to Heart and Hand with an idea about being able to try and produce a pod. Tell us a little bit more about that for people who haven't had the chance to listen to it on our Patreon site.
Yeah, sure thing, Cammy. So yeah, I am. I don't know if you would want to call me a Rangers widow, but my partner's a Rangers lifer, has followed the club his entire life, and I've never been into football. Was not brought up in a football family at all. My dad really liked snooker, and that was about it. So the only time we ever watched football was when Italy were playing in the World Cup. Like we were those guys that were experts for a fortnight every 4 years. But otherwise we weren't really that interested. And but my partner sadly lost his father a couple of years back, and that was just before the run to Seville. And what he didn't want to do was lose his dad's season ticket. And I was at a loose end, so I started going along to the games. And I'll admit, to begin with, I was really only there for the halftime refreshments and, getting to go out and spend a bit of quality time with the other half. But there was something about this club, and there was something about, in particular, that season that just got under my skin. And that I remember the very first time that I got it was when we beat RB Leipzig at home, and it was just electric, and I was hooked. So that was me. So I'm kind of, since then, I've been digesting everything I can, and become an avid listener to Heart and Hand, which has been an amazing source of information and news. So props to you, Cammy, and David and the team for really hooking me in. But one thing that I found was that a lot of the pods I kind of felt were speaking to other lifers and other people that were really steeped in the history of Rangers and knew who everybody was and all the references, and I just didn't get them. And it took me double the time to listen to the pods than the actual playing time, because I kept having to stop it and run around and ask my other half, who's this and what does this mean? So when David Edgar put out the call for new podders and new ideas, I thought, I need something that's going to give me the ground and kind of be a bit of a Rangers for dummies. And it's been fantastic. It's been a great experience. I was delighted to be invited onto the network, and it's been brilliant. So we're trying to do it every couple of weeks. Sometimes getting them pulled together maybe takes a wee bit longer, but every couple of weeks I'll sit down with an experienced podder and a kind of Rangers expert from amongst the Heart and Hand team, and we take a letter of the alphabet and we'll pick some topics and we'll talk about them, and I get to ask all the stupid questions, and the idea really is to delve back into Rangers history, to be able to just dig a little bit into the background of some of the players. And so far the feedback's been brilliant, and it's been, it's for people like me that are perhaps new to being a fan of the club. It's something that people might want to play to their kids potentially, so that they can learn a little bit about the club's history. And also, if you're a solid and lifelong Rangers fan, you might learn something as well. So not just facts and figures, but also a little bit about what different players and experiences and games have meant to the Podders on a more wide basis. What they've meant to them as fans as well. So yeah, it's been so much fun. And if you fancy digging into that, you can find that over on the Heart and Hand Patreon site, which I'm sure Cammy will give you all the details of.
I'll do that right now, because I always seem to have to set myself a wee mental reminder as I'm doing the show wrap up. So it's patreon.com/heart and hand. As I say, the R is for Rangers has been a fantastic addition to the stable. And yes, as I say, it's been great to be able to discuss a huge span of different connections with Rangers, but it covers, I think we've went as far back as the last 60, 70, 80 years in some occasions as well. And it's been brilliantly supported by our community of listeners as well for their own personal insights in terms of what we think that the podders who are on in that particular show should discuss as well. So yes, please jump on over to check it out. That will do us for this week. As I say, I'll be back with you definitely next week. And I just want to say thank you to Mike Lee and Paul Myers, our executive producers. Thank you to Zenith Coins. Please jump over to zenithcoins.com if you want to see some absolutely fantastic merchandise from them. Thank you to you all for listening. And thank you, most importantly for me this week, for an absolutely solid extra debut. It's your first time on, Adriana. It will not be your last. I can guarantee you that.
Thanks, Cammy. It's a pleasure to be here, and as a regular listener to Extra as well myself, because I'm a podder, but I also am a listener to the shows. I am thrilled, absolutely delighted to be here, and really excited to be asked. So yes, I'll happily come back again soon, and thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you all for listening, and have a brilliant Easter weekend. Hope you make the most of it, and we'll be back with you next week.